Yeah, that's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I'll I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but I'm just kind of big for it. Hiya folks, Fruit and Doggy here to do another book discussion. Today I'm covering Dean Koontz's By the Light of the Moon. Has just around 350 pages, was copyright date of 2002, and as always I'm just going to start off by reading the synopsis. Dylan O'Connor is a gifted young artist just trying to do the right thing in life. He's on his way to an arts festival in Santa Fe when he stops to get a room for himself and his 20-year-old autistic brother, Shep. But in a nightmarish instant, Dylan is attacked by a mysterious doctor, injected with a strange substance, and told that he is now a carrier of something that will either kill him or transform his life in the most remarkable way. Then he is told that he must flee before the doctor's enemies hunt him down for the secret circulating through his body. No one can help him, the doctor says, not even the police. Stunned, disbelieving, Dylan is turned loose to run for his life, and straight into an adventure that turns the next 24 hours into an odyssey of terror, mystery, and wondrous discovery. It's a journey that begins when Dylan and Shep's path intersects with that of Jillian Jackson. Before that evening, Jilly was a beautiful comedian whose biggest worry was whether she would ever find a decent man. Now she, too, is a carrier. And even as Dylan tries to convince her that they'll be safer sticking together, cold-eyed men and a threatening pack of black Suburbans approach, only seconds before Jilly's classic Coupe de Ville explodes into thin air. And the three are on the run together, but with no idea whom they're running from, or why. Meanwhile, Shep has begun exhibiting increasingly disturbing behavior, and whatever it is that's coursing through their body seems to have plunged him into one wacky nightmare after another. Seized by sinister premonitions, they find themselves inexplicably drawn to crime scenes, just minutes before the crimes take place. What this infinable power is, how they can use to stop the evil erupting all around them, and what they have been chosen are only parts of a puzzle that reaches back into the tragic past and the dark secrets they all share, secrets of madness, pain, and untimely death. Perhaps the answer lies in the eerie, enigmatic messages that Shep, with precious time running out, begins to repeat about a man who does his work by the light of the moon. And that's the synopsis. It's a little bit longer than normal and kind of gives away some of the suspense of the very beginning of the story, to be incredibly honest. This book was very strange for me, and I don't mean in the sense of the subject matter or the events that take place, but more in the sense of how it kept circulating on whether I found it to be, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's got my attention to feeling kind of boring and unengaging, and it's like, this is just really slow and not interesting. I've never had so many peaks and valleys reading through a book like this before. For most of my life, once I start a book, I've been pretty consistent about finishing it. Nowadays, I try to be a little bit more of the mindset. It's like, hey, if it doesn't hold my attention for the first 50 or so pages, dump it. I don't have time to waste reading through books that aren't holding my attention. And, you know, for a book like this, 350 pages, giving it 50 pages is not a tiny portion of the book. That's 1/7 of the book. So if it doesn't hold my attention by then, what's going to make the rest of it like, it was just so wonderful once you got past that horrible first 50 pages. And again, this is going to be somewhat spoiler heavy. I hate to do that, but it's just kind of with the nature of the synopsis only giving away the first small portion of the book, not really going into a lot of details, or not really implying too much more about what happens. But I think the first main thing that sort of irks me is that as the even the synopsis of the book suggests, they are injected with this substance, which we later come to find is just nanites, nanobots. And, that's something that's been theorized, and people have pondered about the implications of possibilities of nanobots. Absolutely makes sense. I can see why. But what happens as a result of this in this story is what I find to be so perplexing, and it just kind of loses me. And I understand, this is 2002. I'm sure even then the idea was much more cutting edge, much more theoretical. And even now, 18 years later, I don't know. I've not really heard anything more about that technology, so I don't know if it's all theoretical, if it's completely impractical, etc., etc., etc. But the results that happen when they're injected with these nanobots, which all they can do is just go into our bodies and make changes to our own physiology, the results of this in this story just don't make any sense, because it's all scientific, but the results feel supernatural. Because you have, for instance, they can get visions and see into the future, things that haven't taken place yet, that are still days away, and they're not even anywhere near the location at the time, but they can get these premonitions of what's going to take place. They can interact and touch objects and pick up kind of like a psychic sense of, oh, somebody touched this and they were a really wicked, evil, foul person with horrendous intentions at mind. Or they can shake somebody's hand and they could not even shake their hand, just touch something that that person touched. So say if they were to like pick up a fork that you just eaten with, and it's like, oh, I get a sense of what this person's like, and I can touch something else that somebody else touched, like a book they just read, and it's like, oh, I can see the connection between the two of these people. They are distant cousins. Wow. And that's just completely nonsensical. It's like, how would all of that be possible just from nanites, nano machines going into your body, and it's like tweaking what's already there? And of course, the most fantastical is a person who can bend space and time, and they can go from where they are right now, in the middle of a small little motel room, and then go out into the middle of nowhere, then go to a completely different state, and go to somebody's house. Just open up a portal, push away space as we know, and it's like, bam, I'm right here. And it's like, really? It's just, it didn't connect for me at all. What they were doing was just so disconnected, so much of a leap and a gap between what was giving these powers that, I don't know, I found it really hard to swallow. And it lost a lot of my attention span, or my willingness to agree with what was taking place. It's like, yeah, I'm willing to buy that. It's like, no, that's bullcrap. And if your audience, your readers, aren't willing to accept what's taking place, then they're really taken out of the book. They're taken out of the story, and you've kind of lost the plot at that point. It doesn't really matter what happens, because it's like, I don't believe this. I don't agree with this. Doesn't make sense. But with the events that unfold, it starts off pretty decently paced. It has a good way of getting your attention because it's really to the point. It just takes enough time to build up the characters and the setting, and they're immediately getting plunged into this situation. But for me, it just seemed to spin its wheels for a lot of the story, because it seemed like a lot of it was them arguing with each other, because you have two men, two brothers, and then a woman. They have no connection, they have no prior relationships, they're all thrown into this situation together. And so you've got basically, because this other individual is autistic, and in this case, basically non-communicative, at least not in a traditional sense that'd be more productive. They are more or less kind of a side, pushed to the sidelines, because they're not having these fights and these arguments and these discussions the way the other two characters are. So what you basically have is basically two people butting heads and disagreeing and getting on each other's nerves, and that's perfectly fine. That's sensible for what's going on. But again, it seems like that just takes up too much of the focus for a while, where they're arguing, and it's like, oh man, freaking out about what's taking place and their next course of action, what they should do. It just kind of plods along for quite a while. And then there are periods where it starts to get kind of more interesting. Like, what are the effects of the powers that they have? And it's like, yeah, I don't think it makes sense that they have these abilities, but their reactions, again, had that, at least their reactions seemed reasonable. Where they're like freaking out, or, no, not quite freaking out, they didn't go into shock or anything, but just trying to logically process what the heck is going on, what they should do about it, what they can do about it. And in one case, one of them basically has such strong compulsions that they have to react to, that they drive like a lunatic, completely reckless, insane styles of driving, because they feel so strongly that they cannot resist it, even though logically it's like, this is nuts, I shouldn't be doing this, there's no reason for me to do this. But they feel that urge is so strong that they can't ignore it. And in those moments, it was more interesting. So for me, what kind of happened was, it started off pretty interesting, holding my attention. Then it has lagged a lot in the middle, with some highlights here and there. And then towards the end, it's like, oh, it kind of got my attention for a while. And then just as it was starting to get an interesting idea going again, it started to get a little bit of traction, just hits that parking brake, comes to a screeching halt, and the story just ends. And I don't want to give away too much about the ending, but I will say something that annoys me is they basically come across a resource that hand waves away any problems they would have ever had. They basically get not quite infinite resources, but for all intents and purposes, they do. And again, a bit spoilerish, but they basically get a sugar daddy. These characters get a sugar daddy. Their finances, all of their basic needs are suddenly, that's taken care of. You guys don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. You guys can not just live in general security for your needs being met. You're going to live in comfort. You're going to be living a comfortable, luxurious style of living. And again, all the tension that had been built up to that point, the different possibilities, the implications of what could be taking place, just gets cut, just severed, and it's all lost right in that moment. It's like, really? And I guess for me, this is one of those things that annoys me about a lot of books, or it can annoy me, is this idea, well, these characters have suffered. These characters have gone through hardships, and this is something that nobody should have to deal with, or that's unfair, or something along that nature. They've demonstrated they have good character and good values and principles. They're trying to do the right thing, and so they deserve to be rewarded. And they basically win the lottery. And that gets annoying because when you think about real world, what actually takes in real life, it just it comes across as a slap in the face. Because we've all dealt with hardships, we've all dealt with problems and unfortunate circumstances, and we don't just get to win the lottery where it's like, oh, you've had it so hard and here's just a bucket full of money and a pat on the head, and it's like, oh, I'm so sorry for you, and now you get to live the rest of your life in comfort. And it's like, no. I know what the counter is going to be. Well, it's a story. It's a work of fiction. It doesn't need to be grounded by reality. And it's like, that's not really the issue. That's just really weak and lame, in my opinion. Because, yes, doesn't need to be grounded by that reality. But when you just hand it over to them on a silver platter, and it's so disproportionate to what they've really suffered through or what they've truly earned, then again, it just kind of feels like a backhand. Where it's like, that's just not how things work. Is it how things should work? Well, ideal world, yeah, but if you want to argue the ideal world, then nobody would ever even deal with hardships in the first place, right? You would just always live in comfort and happiness. I don't know. But for me, I would have liked the story more if maybe they did encounter somebody else. There was that kind of wild card factor, but again, maybe pull it back like 10 degrees where it's not so luxurious, where it's not so cushy. Excuse me. Where they have maybe the safe haven, but it's a little bit more shaky. Where the future is less certain. Because again, that's basically where the story just ends. Plunges off the edge of a cliff. So instead of it being so grandiose, and it's like, yeah, we've got wealth and luxury now, it's make it more uncertain. If you're gonna plunge it off the edge of a cliff instead of, oh, they all live happily ever after like a fairy tale, how about, the future is uncertain. We have the potential, we already did, but now we at least have a base. Because they've basically been on the run the entire time. And so just a safe haven, a base, a home structure that they can kind of hunker into and establish as a base of operations. It's like, yeah, that's a big boon. But it doesn't get them out of hot water just immediately. Doesn't just solve all of their problems and everything's hunky-dory. So it could be a little bit more neutral of an ending. And it's like, well, I want the happy ending. I want the, everything's all tied up on a happy little bow ending. I usually do too, but again, not when it's unearned like this. Not when it's so sudden and immediate and it doesn't, again, really connect the dots of what was taking place at that point. With the way the story was going to this point, I would have much preferred an ending like that was much more grounded, much more ambivalent. Yeah, I think even the title and the kind of neutral front cover would support that idea and concept. By the light of the moon. You can see clearly by the light of the moon, but you can see under the light of the moon, but everything's not crisp and clear. You don't see the full shades of color. You miss a lot of details. So wouldn't it have made sense tonally for the story to end on that sort of image where it's like, things are maybe hopeful. We have something to have hope for and ambitions and goals for. We're going to survive, maybe. I don't know. I just think that ultimately this book, I just didn't really love it. I was surprised I got through it. At times somewhat happy I was reading it and happy to get through it, but by the time I was actually through it, I was like, really? I wasted my time on this? That's kind of what it felt like to me, but that's just my opinion. Because there actually were a few high points, I guess I wouldn't say burn it. I guess I'd have to go for borrow it, where I definitely wouldn't recommend buying it. But again, that's just my thoughts on the book. Let me know what your experience was like. But otherwise, I guess I'm going to wrap up there. But I appreciate you watching, folks. And as always, for Doggy. Yes, there really is nothing quite like curling up with a fine piece of literature, if you know what I mean.